I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, getting to Germany has never been faster. This week, new nonstop air service between New Orleans and Frankfurt was announced. The flight will take 10 hours, which is only about twice the time that it takes to drive to Destin. In Baton Rouge, the legislature is still hoping to get off the ground with budgetary issues. We'll look at these stories tonight, plus Tom Benson going to court, boom times for the port, the latest on politics for the fall elections, and a special look at the condition of local levees. At the gate for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, New Orleans Advocate. Kathy Finn, freelance journalist and author of an upcoming book about Tom Benson. And Dennis Waltering, retired anchor WWL TV Channel 4 and freelance reporter. We're over to Stephanie first because we are now just about 1 week into that special session. Both chambers are adjourned until Monday.
Nobody knows what to do. Nobody's in session today. It's been so long.
What is going to be done then?
I think they're going back to see if they still have homes, if they still have jobs, kids, all that.
Right, because they've been there for a long time.
They have.
But so far in this special session, the governor wants to raise that $600 million we need to plug the hole.
Exactly.
How's it going for him?
Not great so far. So far, the House Ways and Means Committee, and actually the House, has passed about a third of that. And it's mostly a tax on HMOs. So, you know, it's not a tax on individuals, although there's a feeling there would be a pass-through. But he lost one of the big proposals that he wanted to get through was an individual income tax increase that basically would have come from a reduction in how much people can take in excess itemized deductions on their state income taxes. This is something that would affect largely upper income people and raise, I think, $116 million. He had a Republican sponsor for that bill, a guy named Rob Shadowin, and there was a very testy vote in the House Ways and Means Committee. The decisive vote was cast against it by a New Orleans Democrat, the chairman, Neil Abramson, the Ways and Means Committee. He had to break the tie. He broke the tie, and there are just some really hard feelings. And again, Neil Abramson has really been in the spotlight lately because he was also the author of the House construction budget that ended up not passing at all in the regular session, and that, you know, people are furious about that.
That was the first time since the 1970s we've not had a capital outlay bill come out in the regular session.
And so this basically covers all of the construction projects in the state. You know, the Superdome, bridges, water supplies. Local governments really relying on this. They are going to pass it, obviously, during this special session, but you know, the House basically had, I think, 5 days to concur with the Senate and a conference committee, which is the way these things always end up, these big bills. You know, there's the House version, there's a Senate version, and then they get together and iron out their differences. Monday, the last day of the session, it was actually pretty comical. Nobody could find Neil Abramson. Dan Claytor, a Republican state senator from Baton Rouge, went to Twitter and he started posting pictures all day saying he went up to the top of the Capitol and said, "Nope, Neil's not here," and went back to where he was, not in the stairway, and it ended up being this kind of, you know, comic relief thing. But it was a serious situation. And in fact, the Senate was furious. John Alario, who's the Senate president, who's very much a gentleman, was really sharply critical of Neil Abramson. J.P. Morrell, who's the kind of equivalent committee chair, another New Orleans Democrat, but they are not allies at all. Certainly they're not now. Very critical of Abramson's willingness to actually deal with him. What Abramson has said is that there were technical issues that could not be dealt with in that amount of time, yet they came back and passed it almost immediately, almost in the same form in the special session. And Governor Edwards, obviously, I mean, poor man has his grim face. He's got it down pat, I have to say. So he had what he knew would be a grim press conference in the half hour between the two sessions, and it was even grimmer because he had to talk about the fact that we didn't have a capital outlay budget.
But the House did pass the bill out of the House, actually, from the floor yesterday and Thursday, essentially admitting that it is much like the Senate version, but plus, as Abramson likes to say,
with
some other
House
things
projects, which, you know, isn't really what he was talking about last week. So, I mean, there's a lot of confusion as to what's going on, but we will get a capital outlay budget, but there are a lot of sore feelings in the process.
Is there money to pay for all of these projects?
Well, no, and that's a larger issue with capital outlay. We've had a long, long history of everybody wants to put something in the capital outlay budget so they can go back to their constituents and say, look, I got this project in, but then there's never enough funding for all of them. So there's this priority system that really is very dishonest, and everybody involved understands is dishonest. So, this is kind of the backdrop of this, is there's an effort to reform that and to kind of pull out some of these projects that will never get funding and be more honest. And that's something, ironically, that both Abramson and Governor Edwards are very much for. And yet they're still kind of in an impasse.
So we see about $200 million in taxes have passed so far.
Yes.
But we're about $400 million short to plug the hole. So what's going to happen, do you think?
And there's incredible pressure from anti-tax groups on these legislators, particularly some of the Republicans, the moderate Republicans who could go either way on it. Industry groups, lobby, Americans for Prosperity, really leaning on people. And threatening to even run, go to their constituents and do direct mail, things like that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. What's on the other side, putting the pressure on the other side is there are still these shortfalls, and I think the thing to watch is really TOPS, because the Republicans, the anti-tax Republicans in the legislature tried to protect that. That's something that's very popular with their constituents. Cameron Henry tried to basically have that funded 100%. The final version of the budget that is in effect now has it funded at 50%, and that means of all the people getting TOPS, everybody's going to get half of their award. Now, and people are waiting to find out what their bill's going to be. It's a lot of this is really affecting people, so that gives John Bel Edwards the leverage that he has in this situation.
So we'll see a lot of maneuvering over the last 10 days or so of the session.
Very much.
And they're not back until Monday, and that's when we start seeing the action again. Okay,
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Okay.
All right, over to Kathy right now. And come June 20th will be, the trial starts in federal court, a lawsuit that Tom Benson has against two trustees of this trust that is in question right now.
Right, that's a week from Monday that it's set, unless there is a settlement of the case before that, which could happen all the way up to Sunday night.
Right.
So, and I have to believe that they are pushing for that Benson's lawyers would love to have this settled and not go to court. For one thing, they would like him not to take the witness stand, and he is listed as a witness by both sides in the upcoming case. This is a case where he, as you said, sued the trustees of several what they call irrevocable trusts in the names of his heirs, his daughter and two of his grandchildren. And it's become a source of dispute because after the family blow up that began in late 2014 and into 2015, he cut them all out of, or attempted to cut them out entirely from ownership of the sports teams, the Saints and the New Orleans Pelicans, and a lot of other very valuable properties that he owns. And he had already placed a lot of this into their trust. And in a complicated maneuver, which is completely legal, but it's extremely complicated to explain, so I won't go too deep in the weeds about this. But it's a matter of him putting promissory notes up, lending them the money to take the assets out so they escape the gift tax on these transfers of property. And the offshoot of that is that he has the ability to remove those assets as long as he replaces them with something of equal value. So he has proposed putting promissory notes for hundreds of millions of dollars into their trusts, taking all of the Saints and Pelicans shares back, the Benson Tower property and all of that. The key here that makes it so complicated, one of the keys, is the fact that all of the shares that those heirs hold, or their trusts hold, are non-voting shares in the sports teams, whereas Benson has retained 100% of the controlling shares throughout this whole thing. So it's not a question of who actually will operate the teams after all of this is done, although that could become an issue later on down the line, depending on what happens with this trial. But one of the issues is trying to value one non-voting share versus one voting share, because they are not equal in dollar value. And there's no rule of thumb for doing that, and it's a very complicated thing to do. And there are two teams, and there are a lot of other assets involved, and it's just an endless series of calculations.
Is this what the court action will do, is try to come up with these calculations and these valuations?
In order to settle this, they have to decide, they have to agree, or the court has to determine values of each of those teams, values of the Benson Tower, values of a whole lot of other WVUE television station, which Benson owns and is part of this whole thing. And so they have a series of independent or outside valuation experts coming in by both sides and giving their versions of what it's worth. And of course, one side is trying to value it higher and one side is trying to value it lower.
Right. Now, the Benson team tried to seal documents, some very sensitive financial documents that also involved the NFL and the NBA.
Right. They made a motion to seal all of the exhibits in the trial. They would love to have it just as quiet as was the proceeding against Benson when they tried to have him declared mentally unfit to run his affairs, which he prevailed in that suit, of course.
But the issue, I think, that concerns fans the most about the control of the teams, that looks like that'll remain in Tom Benson and his and then Gail's hands, and not in his family in Texas.
Ostensibly so, but just as is characteristic of all of this dispute, it's not that simple. I think one of the things that as I said, the Benson's lawyers would like to avoid is putting Tom Benson on the stand.
Yeah.
He is 80. He will be 89 years old in July. We can see that he's been very controlled in how much exposure he's had publicly. His lawyers and his handlers, really maintain tight control over that. And his lawyers would like to not see him on the stand, for sure. That doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he's doing. I'm just saying that anyone of that age is, capable of looking perhaps a little flimsy on the stand.
And we should also say that motion to seal was denied.
The motion was denied, so all of this is still public. If the trial goes forward, all of these records are public. It includes records involving the sale of NFL teams, many other, at least a dozen other NFL and NBA teams, and some of the values that were used in those. It includes personal financial information of Tom Benson. There are a great many things that he would like to not see come out. So even, whether they settle or whether the court determines the values, in the end, he will still have the controlling interest. But I guess one point that I'd like to make is the fact that if they put him on the stand and he shows any evidence of decline, there's nothing to stop those heirs from coming back and trying it again to have him declared unfit.
Okay, so June 20th right now is the trial date.
That's right.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kathy.
Thank you.
Going over to Dennis now. Dennis, good to see you again. Hope
Nice
you're
to see
enjoying
you.
your
Nice to be
retirement.
here.
I'm glad you're
Yes.
not totally retired. You're out there still reporting, and you did some reporting about the condition of our levees, which you found.
I did, yeah. I mean, I think everyone has heard that we have the best storm protection system we've ever had, but there are some concerns. The East Bank Levee Authority had a study done, a $385,000 study by an engineer named Bob Jacobson, and he raised concerns about the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal. That's the Industrial Canal and the GIWW, the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, and that area is an area that was breached quite a bit. A lot of the flood walls were breached during Katrina. Those were eye walls that fell over and flooded St. Bernard, 9th Ward, New Orleans East, even part of the metro area. The walls that were breached have been replaced, for the most part replaced with T-walls, which are much more secure. It's like an upside-down T and has a concrete floor on the bottom, so if water overtops, it's not going to erode the other side. But some of those walls were not replaced. So they're concerned about those walls if the water rises too high. If it gets up to 8 feet, they're concerned that those eye walls that are still in place could fall over and breach as they did in Katrina. And we now have much greater protection of the front line. That's really the second line of defense. The front line is this huge storm surge barrier at Lake Warren, the largest storm surge barrier in the world. And also at the Seabrook Bridge, they have floodgates. So those are the front lines of defense. But if we have a storm that is slow moving, drops a lot of rain, it could fill up the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal, and that's what they're concerned about.
And the weakness of
And the weakness of
those eye
walls.
walls. Are they buttressed?
Well, that's so Jacobson has two solutions. One is to buttress or replace those flood walls with buttress them with a rectangular concrete on the protected side of the levee. That would cost tens of millions of dollars. The other solution is to open floodgates at Bayou Bienvenue, which is inside the storm surge barrier. So if you open those floodgates, water would flood out into a wetland area, and 1 foot of flood water in the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal would amount to 1.5 inches in the wetlands. So they feel that would relieve, it would be like a pressure release on the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal. However, if the water rises too high in the wetlands, it could threaten St. Bernard Parish, so they have to have a way to close it remotely. That would cost $1.8 million to do that. Now, they're concerned about it because in Hurricane Gustav, before we had the storm surge barrier and before we had the Seabrook floodgates, the water did rise in the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal to the point that it was splashing over in some places, and they were concerned about breaches at that point. So that's the East Bank. On the West Bank, everything is pretty much in place. They have the huge West Closure Complex with the largest pump station in the world. Pumps out water at the rate of, they could fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool in 4.5 seconds. That's how fast it pumps out water. And they also have the largest floodgates in North America to keep a channel of water coming in from the Gulf. But they have several areas of levees that are not up to the 12.3 required level. And one of those, by Bayou Signet, is actually 3.5 to 4 feet below where it should be. So this summer they're going to work on raising those levees. The other one is by Lake Catawatchee. So those are the areas of concern on the West Bank.
Yeah, there's some 3 or 4 feet below where there should be. That really is a vulnerability.
Yes.
And then, of course, levees sink, too. They
They
settle.
sink. Well, and that's the issue. At Bayou Signet, this is a brand new levee, and the newer levees sink faster because the ground is settling. And older levees, they've already settled for the most part. So this one is settling faster. And if that levee is overtopped, the water could flood into West Wego, into Marrero, into Harvey, and possibly even into Gretna. So that's a serious concern.
It's a constant battle. We always have to be on our
But
toes.
you know what?
with that.
They point out, on both sides, they point out that the greatest concern is that people evacuate if we have a big storm. They say a monster storm could overtop this system that we have, this best system we've ever had.
Even that big surge barrier.
Even that big surge barrier could overtop all of this. So it's key that people evacuate. Susan McClay on the West Flood Authority says the greatest weakness the system has is the complacency by the public that they might not evacuate. They think that it hasn't happened since Katrina, it might not happen again, and so they wouldn't evacuate.
Perhaps they weren't even here. We have so many
Possibly.
newcomers here
The
who
people
haven't
who live in the
lived through
city
that.
or East Bank, Jefferson, aren't they better protected? And thus, would they have less reason to need to evacuate?
They are better protected, but no, they would not have less reason. Basically, Bob Jacobson, this engineer, says that this storm protection system is meant to give you reasonable insurance rates to protect property, but it's not there to protect life. So if there's a big storm, you would be advised to evacuate.
Always evacuate. Basically, that's the message that they tell us.
It is.
All right, Dennis, thanks. So keep doing this, please. We want to keep bringing you here.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot. Okay, over to Errol now, talking about travel to Germany is going to be nonstop.
Yeah, it's good to hear that Dennis voice again. New Orleans had mixed successes trying to be an international airport. Truly, most of the international traffic has been to Latin America, and even that hasn't really lasted. There have been some efforts to nonstops to Europe. The old national airlines once even went to Amsterdam from New Orleans. I think they were thinking about oil industry people. That didn't last. British Airlines was going to do something from New Orleans to London. There was a flight that originated in Mexico City, then Mexico City to New Orleans, and then to London. That didn't last either. And so it would be wonderful if something would last. This is a little bit different. This is an airline that I trust most people never heard of. It's called Condor Airlines. It's out of Germany. It's Germany's third largest airline, and it calls itself a leisure airline. As opposed, I don't think it's building its hopes around
That's
the
not
business.
leisurely airline.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't think it's building its hopes around the business traveler. And in fact, on the European side, supposedly Europe has a heavier percentage of leisure travelers than business travelers. And supposedly, I couldn't imagine somebody going from Frankfurt to New Orleans who's a business traveler. I mean, if they're going to Washington or New York. And so anyway, I think that's what they're starting to build, and Condor has established several nonstops in other cities too, Seattle and Las Vegas and San Diego. What it's doing, it's doing seasonal. It's going to be May through September, beginning in next summer in 2017, and it's going to be on Wednesdays and Sundays. It's going to be a 10-hour flight, and could this be the beginning? We don't know, but it's something. The disadvantages it has is like if you're going to Europe and you're flying Delta or American Airlines, you're part of a hub system that will feed you into Miami or Atlanta or something. Anybody getting in a Condor plane to go to Germany is probably from New Orleans. They weren't fed into here as part of the hub system. That's the other important point, is that the flight goes to Frankfurt. Frankfurt is a big European hub airport. It's probably not the first place that most people who want to go to Germany would want to go to. I guess they want to go to Berlin or somewhere else. And so probably when somebody gets to Frankfurt, they got to figure out how to get somewhere else. But at least it's a beginning, and you hope that's something we can build on. And at the same time, there's the new constructions begin at the airport. There's also new technologies with some of the big jets that are coming in the future. And I think you can see some cities that haven't been served by international flights getting more of those. And one thing I want to specify, the term nonstop and direct are misused a good bit. A direct means that you're in the same plane, okay, but it could stop along the way.
Multiple times.
Okay. Yeah. It could stop many times. That's what a direct flight is. And a lot of times in the press, I mean, even in the headlines in this story, they were used interchangeably. Nonstop means nonstop. And so all nonstops are direct, but not all directs are nonstop. And so just be sure you know what you're talking about. But what
good point.
Okay. But what they're talking about is a nonstop.
All right, good. It starts next May.
Right.
Okay, thanks a lot, Errol. And okay, from air to sea, the port's doing pretty good here in New Orleans.
Yes, they've had some record years with container cargo through the port. 10, 15 years ago, they really started to work on building that up, and they've been very successful. But one of their biggest contributors in recent years has been the Chiquita banana trade, which they successfully lured back from Gulfport. New Orleans had lost that trade many years earlier, and everyone was cheering that they were coming back. And then all of a sudden, recently we've heard that there is some trouble afoot, and that it's possible Chiquita could leave again. Of course, they're under new ownership since they came in here initially. And so that's part of the problem, I guess. I don't think we know exactly what's going to happen there, but that could certainly take those numbers down a little bit. But
the fact that it's been so quiet since it was originally announced tells me that there's some people talking in the back room somewhere.
Yeah, and it probably isn't good, I would say. But we don't know the outcome yet. But it probably, if the trade does leave, that it probably would harm those numbers. It'd bring them back down a little bit. And Chiquita was also supposed to put a banana ripening facility here. And the port actually agreed to put up some of the money and actually spent, I believe, $1 million or more on that facility. And then Chiquita didn't take it and elected to keep the ripening facility in Gulfport. So it's not clear.
The port would like to see the banana business stay.
Well, they'd like to see the bananas stay in port,
and to keep up the good numbers that they've had now.
But meanwhile, so they're looking also at expanding. They have to keep looking at the other trade, of course.
Yeah.
And they are talking more about moving some things into Jefferson Parish. Jefferson Parish has been complaining recently, actually over a period of decades, this has been going on, that even though the port is a multi-parish port, most of its facilities are in Orleans Parish, and Jefferson has always been a little bit upset about that. So there's talk that now they're talking more intently about trying to move some things, put some new things in Jefferson Parish.
Okay. All right, thanks a
But
lot,
was that the
Kathy.
world leader in frozen chickens or something? The big frozen chicken board?
Yeah, well, there's a lot, yes, for sure. I'm not
Okay,
world leader. I would
let's move from port to politics and for all
Rubber
elections
chickens.
right now. We have just a couple of minutes left now. We can talk about what kind of poll results you're seeing for president and for Senate.
Okay, start with president. This is in Louisiana. There was a poll by Southern Media Opinion Research, a Baton Rouge firm, that came out that was really interesting. I should say that it was taken before this latest blow up over Trump University and the judge who was not from Mexico that Donald Trump has been talking about. But it's interesting. I think the numbers very much echo what the two elections involving Barack Obama really, those really are the numbers for the state if you're just looking at a Republican-Democratic election. The Democrat gets somewhere around 40%, the Republican gets in the high 50s, maybe even 60. Trump is a little below that, he's at 52, but Hillary Clinton is at, yes, he's at 53, excuse me. Hillary Clinton's at 39. One thing that's interesting in this is only 8% undecided, which is actually really remarkable when you think of how early it is and how volatile this election's been. The other thing that really stands out is, boy, do people not like these candidates, people in Louisiana. Hillary Clinton's negatives are 64% of people don't like her. And that includes 53% of people who have a very unfavorable opinion of her. So Donald Trump, 52% don't like him. So, you know, it's a hold your nose election, but it does look like at this point it could hold to the usual pattern in Louisiana, even though there are new states that are supposedly in action elsewhere. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of campaigning here.
Okay. And what about the Senate?
The Senate, you know, same poll. I have to say, very good news for John Kennedy, the state treasurer. He is at 32%. Nobody else is close. Charles Boustany at 10. Everybody else less. The thing that's really interesting here, it's a very large field, and John Kennedy is the statewide official. People know who he is. He gets on TV a lot. He's very quotable. His favorable rating is 62% compared to 25% unfavorable. So if any of these other candidates, and there are a lot of them, want to try to take him down, they really need to kind of change opinion on him. And I just think that's going to be very challenging this fall when we're all talking about Trump.
The presidential race.
You know, a few other notes. There are two congressmen running, Charles Boustany, John Fleming. They're both Republicans. You know, they're going to have a tough time because Boustany is from, one reason I think is Boustany is from Lafayette, Fleming is from the Shreveport area. Neither is a major media market. So they, you know, about half the voters don't know who they are. And again, it's going to be hard for them to, I think, get noticed. We have a runoff system, of course. I have to say, I'd be really surprised not to see Kennedy get one of those spots. And then the other one, there are Democrats in, there's an independent, there are Tea Party candidates, mainstream Republicans. It could be anybody.
It's a big field.
Yes.
Okay, Steph. Time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, this will be my last racehorse prediction of the season. That tomorrow is the Belmont, and it's lost a lot of interest because there won't be a Triple Crown winner. And Nyquist, the horse that won the Kentucky Derby, is not even running tomorrow. But who is running is Exaggerator, who's trained by the Desarmar brothers out of Maurice, Louisiana. He won the Preakness, beat Nyquist, and he's the big favorite to win tomorrow. It's two brothers. One's the trainer and one's the jockey, and I think in the whole nation, probably Louisiana will have the highest interest in the race.
Okay, all right, Errol. Thanks, Steph.
I like the name Exaggerator. Back to politics, though. So
That could be politics.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting into veto season, and I'm really curious to see what happens when John Bel Edwards. He signed a bunch of bills, but so far they've been the easy ones. You know, is he going to use the veto pen aggressively, particularly on line items? This construction budget we talked about, he could axe out projects if he's mad at people. That's something Bobby Jindal did pretty aggressively. John Bel Edwards, former state rep, I think has a lot of respect for the legislature, but people have really pushed him, so it's going to be really interesting to see how he responds, I
Okay,
think.
thanks, Steph. Kathy.
Well, again, back to the Benson trial. It's coming up a week from Monday. Next week is a good, keep your eye open for a possible settlement. I'm sure that the attorneys for Benson in particular are working hard on a settlement, but this is so complicated. It has to be a very tall order to settle this case.
Very much so. Thank you, Kathy. Dennis.
Later this summer, the Flood Authority on the East Bank is going to be raising the lakefront levees from Bucktown to Kenner, at a cost of $8 to $10 million. They hope to do that quickly so that the Corps of Engineers can put matting on there to armor the levees.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for watching. Want to see you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.